All right, guys, what's up? My name is Stephen Guidani with 5 Tool Sports Science. So this is going to be like a new thing I'm going to be doing. It's basically just frequently asked questions that I get. So this is a question from Elijah. Put the question up. The question is, hey, I was wondering how you can sit into your glute more while pitching and how to fix a collapsing back leg. It didn't start happening until recently. All right, man. So Elijah, first of all, guys, there's a great article that I wrote on my website. I'm going to link it below. It's basically called The Top 6 High Velocity Pitching Mechanics. And I'm going to go over the back leg load, back leg drive, etc. like that. So the very first topic is the back leg load, okay? So this is the back leg load position. So as you're coming out of leg lift, as your hips are moving forward and down the mound, you're loading the back leg into flexion, you're sitting into your posterior chain, you're setting yourself up to get into a good position to then push force through the ground, power your back leg drive, power hip rotation, and accelerate you down the mound. So you have to understand the components that are needed in order to do that. And in order to do that, you're gonna need great mobility, you're going to need a lot of strength and stability, specifically through the posterior chain, specifically through the hip, specifically through the trunk, in order to hold good posture and good contralateral tilt as you get yourselves into those positions. So let's go over mobility first. So basically what I do is when a guy comes down to work with me, I take him through an assessment. I want to look at hip mobility. I want to look at just mobility in general. So we'll go through a mobility assessment. We're going to go through an athletic assessment so I can get an understanding of how you produce force. Then we go through a biomechanics assessment. So we take a look at your mechanics and see how you're using your body, how you're using your kinetic chain, how you're using your kinematic sequence. And basically all of those components, the mobility assessment and the athletic assessment, all tie into the biomechanics. So here's typically what we'll see. If a guy is struggling to load into his back leg, load hips forward and down, what can be happening is he has a mobility deficiency. He could have a motor control deficiency. He could have a strength and stability and power deficiency. It all just depends on the guy. So let's just cover all of those aspects. So coming out of leg lift, what's going to be happening? Your hip is going to be externally rotating, so you need sufficient external rotation in the hip. Your hip is going to be abducting as you're moving down the mound, so you need sufficient hip abduction. You actually even need a little bit of internal rotation to help you get your force vector into a good position. And a big one is hip flexion. So hip flexion is being able to sit into that back hip, load into that back hip. The flexion is able to, when you're loading into it, the flexion can then create the extension to power the hip rotation. So you have to look at those ranges of motion. Do you have the sufficient range of motion? You would get that from a mobility assessment. Next, you really want to look at, do you have the strength and stability to be able to do it? Do you have enough posterior chain strength, enough just hip strength in general, in order to, on one leg, be able to take your body through that movement, load that back leg, and then most importantly, do you have the power to get out of that position? So the other part of your question is, how can you sit into the hip more, and how do you keep the back leg from collapsing? So mobility and then the strength and stability is the big thing. So especially for a collapsing back leg, that's usually a sign that you do not have the strength needed to hold and maintain that position. Specifically in your hip abductors, what's going to be working to hold that external rotation. So things that we're going to do to work on that. Single leg strength is huge, 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 huge. So things like single leg squats, single leg lunges, single leg deadlifts, even your bilateral squats and holding that external rotation, making sure that you're using good movement through that. Any banded work where you're going to be working on your hip abductors, so like lateral walks with a band. A great one was a PT that I used to work with who would actually use, this was kind of like a functional movement exercise where he would take a guy through his leg lift and put a band around that knee, and he would try to use that band to kind of force the collapse of the back leg, but their job was to resist that through their leg lift as they loaded down the mound. So they would just go into like leg lift, he would have the band, they would start moving down the mound, and that added tension from the band, they're supposed to resist that from letting their back leg collapse. I thought that was a great way to kind of implement it. All right, so that's going to be the strength stability side of it. Then finally is going to be the motor control side of it. So sometimes you just don't you're not used to doing it. You know, you were never taught how to ride your hips forward and down the mountain. You were never taught how to load the back leg, so it's just foreign to you. That's going to be doing drills that are going to be reinforcing those biomechanics. So things that I do with like that, I use you know, banded drills where I have a band connected to a wall. The band is going to be put around your hips, and you can kind of use that resistance in order to slow the movement down. So you can use it laterally through your leg lift, and then you can put it around where the band is going to be facing straight ahead, and you can really try to sit back into your posterior chain and then load the leg as you load the hip as you move, act like you're moving down the mountain. Those are two really effective ways to kind of start learning that motor control in a controlled environment. Other things that we can do is like torsion drills, where you're learning how to hold that torsion and power through that torsion. I'm trying to think of more just off the top of my head. Those are going to be probably two of the biggest ones. Those sled drives, like lateral sled walks, and then sled drives are another big one, where you can kind of use the resistance of the sled to feel that position and really kind of own that position and learn how to load that back hip, sit into your glute, hold that external rotation, and then power out of it. So to answer your question, it really depends on the individual. You have to understand what the mobility is looking like through the hip. You have to understand their strength deficiencies, and then you have to understand their motor control deficiencies. And usually it's a combination of all three. You got to get better at all three. You got to get better at the strength and stability, which is also going to improve the mobility, but you might also have some flexibility issues where you got to work on stretching the hips and stuff like that. And then you also have to combine the biomechanics drill, so you can start learning to use your body to load so it doesn't feel foreign to you. So I hope that answers your question, man. If you guys have any more questions, you can leave some in the comments. You can reach out to me on social media, however you want. Just keep the questions coming, guys. I'll keep trying to bring you guys as much value as I can. I hope you guys really enjoy the videos. Check out the links below. And yeah, take it easy, guys. Have a good one. God bless.